In the deep, suffocating heart of Louisiana, the year is 1848. On the Bowmont Sugar Plantation, the night air is a thick, deceptive perfume, a mixture of sweet-smelling night-blooming jasmine and the ever-present, sickly-sweet odor of sugar-cane processing and human decay. From the big house, perched on a hill like a pale, watchful ghost, comes the faint sound of a piano and distant, civilized laughter, a sound that barely travels 100 yards before being swallowed by the absolute darkness of the slave quarters. This was a world of brutal contrasts, a land where the beauty of the landscape served only to mock the ugliness of the lives lived upon it. It was a kingdom of illusions, ruled by a system that pretended to be paternalistic while its true currency was fear, and its most common transaction was pain. And in this kingdom, the most feared man was not the master, who was often away in New Orleans, but his overseer, a man named Silas Croft. In a small, dilapidated cabin at the edge of the quarters lived a young woman named Sarah. She was known for her silence, a quiet soul who moved through her days with her eyes downcast, her presence as unassuming as a shadow. For Sarah, this night began as all others did, with a small meal of corn mush shared with her younger brother, Jacob, and a silent prayer that the darkness would pass without incident. She did not know that the axe she had used that afternoon to chop firewood, the tool she used to create warmth and sustenance, would soon be used to deliver an eternal, cold justice. She was unaware that Silas Croft, a predator who thrived on the fear of the helpless, had chosen this night to hunt. He did not know that this cabin, which he saw as his hunting ground, was about to become his tomb. These are the stories buried by history, the voices silenced by power. To uncover more tales of defiance and to ensure these acts of resistance are never forgotten, subscribe to our channel and join our mission to tell the whole, unfiltered truth. Sarah's existence was defined by a single, all-consuming purpose: the protection of her 12-year-old brother, Jacob. They were the only two left, the remnants of a family torn apart by the auction block years ago. Jacob, with his bright, curious eyes and a spirit not yet fully crushed by the weight of their reality, was the last flicker of light in Sarah's world. Her love for him was a fierce, silent thing, a fortress she built around him with her own body and will. Her small joys were not her own, they were his. The extra piece of cornbread she saved for him, the smooth, flat stone she found by the creek for him to play with, the quiet stories she would whisper to him at night about the stars. These were the small acts of rebellion that kept her soul alive. Their cabin was not a home. It was a cage. A small, one-room shack with dirt floors and walls that did nothing to keep out the humid cold of winter or the suffocating heat of summer. Yet, within those four walls, Sarah fought to create a sanctuary. It was the only place where Jacob could briefly forget the lash of the overseer's tongue, the only place where she could let the mask of submission fall from her face, if only for a few hours. The architect of their daily terror was Silas Croft. He was a man carved from malice, with pale, watchful eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He took a connoisseur's pleasure in cruelty. He wasn't a man of loud rages. His evil was a quiet, methodical thing. He would walk the rows of sugar cane, not shouting, but speaking in a low, menacing voice that promised violence more effectively than any scream. He had a reputation, a dark legend that was whispered among the slave women. He was a predator who enjoyed the hunt, who savored the fear of his chosen prey. Several young women on the plantation had been broken by him, their spirits extinguished, their eyes left hollow and empty. He saw the slave cabins not as dwellings, but as his own private hunting preserve, and he saw the women within them as his for the taking. For weeks, his pale, cold eyes had been settling on Sarah. She felt his gaze on her back as she worked, a physical weight that made her skin crawl. He had not touched her, not yet. He was savoring the chase, letting the fear build, letting it marinate. But Sarah, and every other woman who saw the way he looked at her, knew. It was not a matter of if. It was a matter of when. The when came on a Tuesday. The sun was a merciless ball of fire in the sky, and the air was so thick with humidity it felt like breathing water. Sarah was returning from the well, a heavy wooden bucket in each hand, when Silas Croft blocked her path. He wasn't flanked by other men. He came alone, which was always more dangerous. He looked her up and down, a slow, appraising gaze that stripped her bare. A cruel smile played on his lips. "You're a quiet one, ain't you, Sarah?" he said, his voice a low drawl. "I like that. The quiet ones are always the most interesting to break." Sarah said nothing, her eyes fixed on a point on the ground just past his boots. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. He reached out and traced a single finger down her arm. The touch felt like a brand, a mark of ownership that she could feel searing into her soul. "The master is gone to New Orleans for the week," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The nights get lonely. I think I'll pay you and the boy a visit tonight. See how hospitable you can be." It was not a request. It was a pronouncement, a death sentence for her spirit. He was telling her that her sanctuary was about to be desecrated, that the one place she fought to keep safe for her brother was about to become a stage for her violation. He wasn't just threatening her. He was threatening Jacob, threatening to shatter the boy's innocence and force him to bear witness to her ultimate humiliation. As he walked away, chuckling to himself, something inside Sarah snapped. It wasn't a loud, explosive sound. It was a quiet, terrifying shift, like the cracking of a glacier. The fear that had been her constant companion, the fear that had dictated every moment of her life, did not vanish. Instead, it underwent a horrifying alchemy. It cooled, hardened, and sharpened itself into a single, diamond-hard point of resolve. The terror of what he would do was eclipsed by the certainty of what she had to do. The victim who had stood frozen on that path died in that moment. What walked back to the cabin was something else entirely. It was an avenger. She looked at her small, fragile cabin, and she saw not a cage but a trap. And tonight, she would be the one to spring it. Back in the suffocating confines of her cabin, Sarah moved with a chilling, newfound purpose. The world, which had always been a chaotic landscape of unpredictable dangers, had suddenly narrowed down to a single, clear path. There was no room for tears, no space for despair. Those were luxuries for a life that still had choices. Her choices had been stripped away, leaving her with only one. She looked at Jacob, who was mending a fishing line in the corner, blissfully unaware of the sentence that had been passed on them. The sight of his innocent concentration solidified the ice in her veins. He would not see this. He would not be broken by this. Her mind, once clouded with a fog of constant fear, was now a machine of cold, clear logic. Running was impossible. The swamp and the dogs would claim them before dawn. Pleading was useless. It would only amuse Silas. Hiding was a fool's errand. That left only one option: defiance, absolute, final, and lethal. The fear was still there, a cold snake in her gut, but it was no longer her master. It was her fuel. Her thoughts were no longer a prayer for survival, but a checklist for vengeance. She went to the small woodpile just outside her door. Her hands, which had trembled as she carried the water buckets, were now steady as she picked up the wood-splitting axe. It was old and heavy, its blade dulled from use, but its weight felt solid and real in her hands. It was a tool of her servitude, a symbol of her daily toil. Tonight, it would become an instrument of her liberation. She brought the axe inside and hid it carefully under her thin straw mattress, a cold, hard promise lying beneath the place where she was supposed to sleep. Her plan was brutally simple, a desperate strategy born from a complete absence of options. She would not fight him at the door. She would not give him the satisfaction of a struggle. She would let him enter. She would let his arrogance and his lust be his undoing. She would let him step into her world, into her space, believing he was the predator. He would only realize he was the prey when it was too late. As she prepared a meager supper for Jacob, she moved like a phantom, her face an emotionless mask. She was no longer just a woman. She was a guardian at the gate of hell, and she would be damned if she let the devil drag her brother in with her. Night fell on the plantation like a black shroud. The air grew thick and still, amplifying every sound, the frantic chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a dog, the rustling of unseen things in the tall grass. Inside the cabin, Sarah had put Jacob to bed in the far corner. She had given him a sip of a sleeping tea made from herbs, a mild concoction to ensure he would not wake. She sat on her own cot, the cold, hard outline of the axe beneath her a constant, terrifying comfort, and she waited. Every nerve in her body was on fire. Time stretched and warped, each second an eternity. Then she heard it. A single heavy footstep outside the cabin, then another, deliberate, unhurried. The crickets fell silent. He was here. The cabin door, which had no lock, creaked open slowly. Silas Croft's large frame filled the doorway, a monstrous silhouette against the pale moonlight. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him, plunging the cabin into near-total darkness, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. The air was instantly thick with the foul, cloying smell of cheap whiskey. "I told you I'd come, girl," he slurred, his voice a low growl in the darkness. He took a step forward, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He could just make out her shape, sitting on the edge of the cot. He mistook her stillness for fear, for the paralyzed terror he so enjoyed. "No need to be shy," he chuckled, taking another step. "We're going to get to know each other real well tonight." Sarah remained silent. She did not move. She let him close the distance. She let his arrogance be her shield. In his mind, the outcome was already decided. He was a wolf and she was a lamb. He was 2 feet away from her now, reaching out a hand to grab her. It was in that moment, as his shadow fell completely over her, that she moved. It was not a panicked, clumsy motion. It was a single, fluid and practiced arc, a movement her body knew from chopping hundreds of logs. With all the strength born of years of labor and a lifetime of suppressed rage, she swung the axe from under the cot. The blade, dull as it was, met the side of his head with a sickening, wet crunch. The sound was horribly loud in the small, silent cabin. Silas Croft made a noise, not a scream, but a choked, gurgling grunt of pure animal surprise. He staggered sideways, his hand flying to his head, his mind unable to process what had just happened. He had been the hunter. This was impossible. But Sarah did not hesitate. She did not give him time to recover or to scream. She was on her feet, raising the axe again, her face a mask of cold fury in the moonlight. She brought it down again, and then again, her movements driven by a primal, desperate need to end the threat, to erase this monster from her world forever. And then it was over. The only sound in the cabin was her own ragged, desperate gasps for air, silence, a profound, absolute silence. She stood over his body, the heavy axe dripping in her hand. There was no relief, no joy, only a vast, cold emptiness. The predator was dead. The threat was gone, but the night was far from over. The adrenaline that had fueled her began to recede, replaced by a chilling clarity. Leaving the body here was not an option. By dawn, the entire plantation would be searching, and her cabin would be the first place they looked. Jacob would be orphaned, and her own fate would be a horror beyond imagination. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she began the gruesome task. She wrapped Croft's body in a threadbare blanket, muffling any sound as she dragged his dead weight across the dirt floor and out into the night. The journey to the nearby swamp was a nightmare. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like an alarm. The body was heavy, an anchor of sin she had to dispose of. She dragged him to the edge of the black, murky water, a place whispered to be home to snakes and alligators, a place where things and people disappeared. With a final, desperate shove, she sent his body into the swamp. It landed with a soft, sucking sound and was quickly swallowed by the black water. Silas Croft was gone. The next day, a search was organized. The master was furious, the other slaves a mixture of terrified and secretly hopeful. They searched for days, but the swamp kept its secrets. Silas Croft was presumed to have run off, or perhaps fallen victim to some accident in the wilderness. No one ever looked at Sarah. The quiet, timid girl was invisible, the last person anyone would ever suspect. She was not caught. She and Jacob survived, but Sarah was forever changed. She remained silent, but her silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of fear, but the silence of a guardian, a woman who had faced the devil in her own home and had sent him back to hell. The other slaves sensed this change. They didn't know the details, but they knew that the predator who had stalked their nights was gone, and that Sarah was the reason why. A new legend was born, a whispered tale of the quiet girl whose cabin was her fortress, and who had met evil not with pleas, but with an axe. Her act of defiance became a secret symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, a single, determined soul could refuse to be a victim, and in doing so, could become a legend.